So this week's here in an hour, first on BBC One and BBC One HD. Leading the political debate, here's David Dimbleby.
Tonight we're in Edinburgh with the youngest audience we've ever had on Question Time, all 16 or 17-year-olds, the first people of this age to have the vote in the United Kingdom. Welcome to Question Time. And on our panel tonight, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson, Labour's deputy leader in Scotland, Sarwar, the Respect MP, George Galloway, the SNP leader at Westminster, Angus Robertson, the broadcaster and columnist, Lesley Riddoch, and the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, back in Edinburgh for the first time since he was chased out by protesters. And the reason, of course, we have this young audience here is that the Scottish Parliament voted to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in next year's referendum on Scottish independence. But that is not the reason that we're having the debate. It's not about Scottish independence. We've got lots of other things to talk about. We just want to know what this section of society thinks about some of the issues that we face, as always, on Question Time. The first question comes from Kieran Fitzgerald, please.
Is surveillance of our internet activity an acceptable price for national security?
This is surveillance of our internet activity an acceptable price for national security in the light of the revelations that came from the United States this week? George Galloway.
Benjamin Franklin said that those who will sacrifice liberty for security will in the end enjoy neither. The sacrificing of our liberties can only lead to a victory for those who wish to destroy liberty. And I think that the revelation, the whistleblower, instead of being extradited and sent to prison for the rest of his life, should be given a medal, should be given a Nobel Prize, because he has revealed illegal state surveillance on a truly gargantuan scale. The United States NSA, National Security Agency, has bugged 3 trillion telephone calls a year. Trillion telephone calls a year. There is mass surveillance of people in the United States, and that's bad enough. What's worse is that the British security services have been making use of the intelligence thus garnered in breach, actually, of British law. William Hague tried to pooh-pooh it this week by saying that he'd authorised it. Well, frankly, I wouldn't trust William Hague to guard our liberties in any respect. The best way to deal with the threat of terror in the world is to address the causes of terror in the world. And that will not be done by the state becoming ever more terrorist itself.
OK.
I think the first thing we should do is recognise the important role that our public servants in our surveillance and security industry make to all of us to keep us safe every single day. I think all of us should show our appreciation to them. It's right that we have a system in place that has democratic accountability and a tight legal framework. And it's important that the public has confidence in the work that our intelligence agency does. One, so they can make sure they have the support of the public, but secondly, to make sure that they are working within a legal framework.
But George Galloway says they're breaking the legal framework. Do you agree with that or not?
I'm just coming to that point. It's right that law-abiding citizens know that their security and services and agencies are themselves law-abiding. And that's why I think William Hague has some very serious questions to answer. Did he sign off on the surveillance agencies from the US to tap into British people's phones and emails? And if he didn't, then it's very clear that if there's been any breach of UK laws, then those people and those agencies should feel the full force of UK justice.
OK. But you as a party actually want more surveillance, don't you? You're with the Home Secretary in wanting more surveillance.
No, you've got to get the balance right.
You want more? You've got to want more or less?
You've got to get the balance right in terms of keeping ourselves secure, but also protecting people's genuine right to privacy. And that's why you have got to have a proper, accountable, democratically accountable process, but also a tight legal framework. You can have it's not acceptable for us to say to people, we expect you all to be law-abiding citizens, and then government ministers and agencies themselves aren't themselves law-abiding. That is not acceptable, and that undermines public trust in what we're trying to do, and that's trying to keep all of us safe and stop terrorist attacks happening on the streets of the UK.
Let's hear from some members of our audience. You, over there. You say.
As George Galloway said there, the whistleblower is getting punished for breaching privacy laws, but the government doesn't get punished at all for breaching our privacy. What's the fairness in that?
Good point. Ruth Davidson.
George Galloway was trying to trade off liberty against security, and actually a responsible government has to balance one with the other. It's not picking one over the other, it's trying to find the right balance. GCHQ, which is the agency in charge of this kind of monitoring in the UK, works within an incredibly tight legal framework. And when it goes and does surveillance operations, these have to be signed off by the Secretary of State. It's not, 6,000 desk jockey James Bonds looking through your Hotmail account to see who you fancy. That's not what they do. They're called an intelligence agency because they work on intelligence. If they were looking at everybody's data, they wouldn't find anything of any use because they'd be snowed under. Now, we have an incredibly important link with the United States. We've worked with the United States to foil terror plots before, and we will do again to keep people of this country safe. But the framework that exists does not allow for UK intelligence agents to get round UK law by using somebody else's, some other country's data sharing. That's not what it exists
but
to
is
do.
Is it happening? That's the point, isn't it? Is it arriving at GCHQ, this information from the States? And you say, well, you'd be snowed under. But, I mean, as George Galloway said, there are trillions of calls that have been tapped into or checked. So it does in America.
We have an absolute guarantee that any data obtained in the UK from the US involving UK nationals is subject to exactly the same right and proper UK statutory controls as elsewhere.
What's that guarantee? William Hague's word for it? Because it cannot be. William Hague would have no time to do anything else if he was signing warrants every day for the British share of 3 trillion telephone calls a year. It stands to reason that the James Bonds that you talk about, though, frankly, to me, they look more like Austin Powers. The James Bonds at GCHQ must be freelancing on this. Otherwise, we'd never see William Hague's face because he'd be in his office signing warrants all day.
Lesley Riddoch.
Well, just to get specific to what I understand Ed Snowden to have done, he wasn't actually whistleblowing, if you like, on the scale of phone call tapping, which we knew about. He's actually looking at Google and Facebook, handing over details that you, and particularly your generation, have thought you gave in trust to someone who was not a government, who was in effect your friend, who was perhaps an intermediary that let you connect with other friends. And it's that is the most significant aspect of this. It's also significant that we can't be sure now that the rules or the outlook that we have in Britain is something that is being is at the heart of the way Google and Facebook are working, because they are an American jurisdiction. Just before we came on air, the US Supreme Court actually found against 2 companies that were trying to patent part of the DNA that we are built from. That's the degree to which American companies very often want to get in and patent and control what is actually belongs to all of us.
In the light of that, do you
that.
accept what Mark Zuckerberg said, which is Facebook never has been part of any programme to give the US or any other government direct access to our servers? Or do you think he's deceiving us?
I think everybody can pick their words very carefully in this. As I understand it, Twitter were the only company that could say hand on heart they didn't cooperate with PRISM. But
he said he hadn't even heard of PRISM before.
Europe has, let's hear it for Europe. Europe has got a whistleblower charter that's been in effect since 1998 that would not prosecute Ed Snowden. So we need to stand up for different values here, and we need to let's set up our own Google and Facebook. Let's think of an opportunity out of all of this. It's going to be a toughie, but we need to pull back our values from where they are at the moment, because they're not safe in those hands.
The woman there in yellow.
I agree that we need to find a balance between sort of surveillance and actually giving everyone their privacy, but it's actually trying to find that balance. How do we actually find that balance and not cross over into almost being like Big Brother? Yeah, where would you come from that?
Are you on Facebook?
Yes.
Are you unnerved by what you've heard this week about the access that security people have to it?
Yes.
Upset by it?
Yes, I feel that I've made my account private and that I should actually be allowed to keep that information private.
And you here in the front, do you agree with her?
Yeah, I do agree with what the Speaker was saying, that obviously I believe national security is very important, but I think in this case it's been a case of behind our backs, little brother Great Britain bowing down to big brother United States. And I think it's time we stand up for our own rights and put our foot down and say, no, these are our laws, this is what our democracy has decided, and we shouldn't just be bowing down to the United States being all-powerful.
Yeah. Angus, you agree with her?
I think what really, really worries me is it's not just about surveillance, it's about storage. So it is what you are chatting about with other people on Twitter, on Skype, on Facebook, on email traffic. It's much more than just phone calls or thinking somebody's suspicious, so let's start recording now. Let's push the record button now. It is recording billions and billions of your conversations. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel very, very uneasy. And it's not just about GCHQ. It's not just about the NSA in the United States of America. There are other places that what you are conversing with other people is being stored as well. So a big issue for me is about the storage of your information. And I agree with George on this point. The idea that we should just trust in William Hague because he's said something in the House of Commons and, oh, everything's all right now. I'm really sorry, I don't think everything's right now. And I think this is going to be one of the coming big debates of the years ahead. You are the IT generation more than any other generation so far. You have grown up from the off, using IT in a way that us fuddy-duddies in the panel never have. And it's going to be even more important to you than it is to us, and we need to get that right.
Well, how would you change that framework, Angus? Because you're saying that the framework that exists and the protections that are put in place, the idea that it has to be signed off by a Secretary of State isn't enough. So what do you suggest? Because I say as soon as you tell people that there is a whole area online which we will never look at, which the security services will never access, then that's exactly where people who want to do harm to our country will move their activity.
But that's not the point I'm making. Everybody agrees, I think, everybody agrees that when there is a risk to society from extremists who are prepared to use violence, there should be appropriate measures in place to make sure that one can intercept telephones or other traffic. Nobody disagrees with that. And those safeguards are in place. But what worries me is we're dealing with an entirely new threat on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're dealing with a whole big issue about how can one intercept but also store this information. Do you really think that all of this is going to be destroyed?
Okay.
No, it's not. It's going to be kept forever and ever.
The man in red over there.
I think we need to start addressing issues as to why we're actually under threat in the first place. And I think it comes back to issues like the war on terror, where we are sending our working class people to go and fight in illegal wars overseas for America's economic interests, and it's about time that we stopped sending the working class people to go and fight for America's economic interest and started bringing people like Tony Blair and others who were in the Labour government at that time up to The Hague to face the war crimes tribunals that they deserve to face.
Nigel Farage.
I think we have a slightly schizophrenic debate on this because we're all horrified this week by what we've heard, and yet just 2 or 3 weeks ago, in the wake of the Woolwich murders, a lot of people were screaming and shouting, saying, look, the security services knew who these guys were, why wasn't more done? So it is about, and several of the panel have said this, it is about balance. However, is what is happening or potentially happening here an acceptable price, was the question. And I think when the Americans launched the war on terror under George Bush, they've gone so far down a road where, frankly, in America, they've now launched a war on liberty and freedom, and it applies not just to surveillance, it applies to a plea bargaining system where if the state says you're guilty, you have almost no choice but to plea bargain guilty. And so I would say this, Lesley's right, these are big American companies, and users have got to be aware that if they're going through American internet service providers, their stuff is not safe. I hope we do get some alternatives out of it, and I really do not want us to go down the route where we allow the liberty of millions of people in this country to be destroyed because we're following the Americans who've frankly gone completely over the top.
But how do you prevent it if you've got Facebook, if that's where you're working on Facebook? How do you prevent it?
I think people have to be cautious when they're using all forms of social media, cautious about what they say and about what they do.
Yeah,
do not think that whatever you say on Facebook is private. It isn't.
All right, in the blue shirt, yeah.
David, you made the point that internet companies such as Google and Facebook have openly came out and said, wait a minute, we've actually never been approached by the National Security Agency, so this is all rubbish. But, in fact, if the NSA did approach Facebook, and of course Mark Zuckerberg openly said, I've never even heard of PRISM, if they did approach Facebook and ask for any information, under US law, Facebook would actually be obliged to completely deny any involvement from the NSA at all. They wouldn't actually be able to say they requested that information. So that shows that we already live under a Big Brother surveillance state, because if governments are found to be storing information that they shouldn't be, or requesting information that they have no access to, they'll find a way to cover it up, and they'll do everything in their power to gag it. So I actually agree with George Galloway when he says that people like Edward Snowden, who, of course, last week it was revealed in The Guardian, showed how easy it was for him to access information. We should be giving people like him a medal instead of prosecuting them.
OK. I'll take one more point, and then we'll move on. The guy in the check shirt there on the gangway.
Yeah, because we've talked about justice and what should be allowed. But I think we can all agree that internet surveillance can be used for good, and I think a way forward for this to improve the situation is for there to be an international law to mean that whenever internet surveillance is used, it's completely transparent with the cooperation of both governments and both intelligence agencies, so that we don't have this American citizens spying on British citizens, which is completely unjust, which is why it's wrong.
Just before we leave this, just as a check, I mean, can you put your hands up if you are on social media, one sort or another, Facebook or whatever? Everybody, good. And then put your hands down again. How many of you are worried by what you've heard this week about... Right, about half of you. OK, we'll go on to another question. Just to say, though, before we do, you can join in tonight's debate from home, of course, by text or Twitter. Watch out, they'll be being watched. Our hashtag is BBCQT, and you can follow us at BBC Question Time, or you can text comments, of course, 83981. Press the red button to see what others are saying. Fiona Murray's question, please. Fiona Murray.
What benefits would independence bring for young people in Scotland?
Very straightforward question. What benefits would independence bring? Who'd like to start on this? Maybe you should, Angus.
The advantages of an independence...
But not at too great length. Well, because we've got 6 of us here.
Very good. Although I notice on this panel we have 4 politicians from other political parties who are opposed and only 1 who's in favour, so it's not...
So you want 5 times as long, do you?
No, I think parity would be good. It's also worth observing we've got a really, really important election in Scotland taking place next week in Aberdeen, and we have 2 representatives who have much to say on the panel tonight from parties that don't have any representation in Scotland. But hold on, it's an important point, David.
No, all right, make the point and I'll answer it.
There are 2 political parties represented in the Scottish Parliament who are part of the election next week, and they're not part of the panel.
I'm sorry, Question Time does not follow by-elections, never has. National elections, yes, but we don't... No, I'm sorry, we never do follow by-elections all the time. And the second thing to say is, on the independence issue, this audience is divided 50-50 on that issue. Now, would you make your point?
I would. One of the big differences with independence is that we wouldn't be mucked around in the way that we have in relation to this programme tonight. We would always have the Parliament that we elect, we would always have the government that we wish, and the decisions that would be made in the Scottish Parliament, not just about things that are limited at the present time with devolution, so health, education, justice and so on, which is working much better under devolution with an elected Parliament and government, would happen with all the other powers, over the economy, over foreign affairs, over defence. These are things that really matter. It's about how do we create jobs? How do we make our economy grow quicker? How do we play a role in the world? How do we get nuclear weapons out of our country? We never wanted them here in the first place. So the difference is there for everybody, but especially for the young. And that's why I'm so proud that it's the SNP who proposed that 16 and 17-year-olds should have a vote in this important referendum. I made my first speech in the House of Commons about lowering the voting age to 16 and 17-year-olds. I think it's really important for our democracy that we get the young, the next generation, to be part of our democratic process. I'm proud the SNP's delivered it, and I'm sure when all the arguments have been had and people have made up their mind, you're going to be an important part of that yes vote that will make Scotland an independent, successful country.
The woman on the right there, you.
You say that we're getting mucked about right now, but do you not think the SNP are mucking us about right now? Because we're not even getting answers on will we have free tuition, will the UK Research Fund, how are you going to subsidise that? How are we going to know that our education is going to be as good as it is right now?
Because the SNP's in government right now.
OK, I'll come back to Angus. Anna Sarwar.
The remarkable thing about Angus's intervention there is he's so worked up about representation on a political panel here today, when you actually have the SNP now saying we want to keep the pound but actually lose our influence over it. We want the Bank of England still setting our interest rates and our mortgage rates. We want the UK sharing of the welfare state. So what he wants is political representation on a panel, but actually less representation for Scots in important UK institutions that have a say on everyday life here in Scotland. What young people need is not a politics of grudge and grievance. What they need is a genuine offer of how we get not just constitutional change that talks about which politicians and what building has what powers, but actually how we get genuine social and economic change as well, so that every young person has the ability, no matter where they live in the United Kingdom, whether they live in Glasgow and Edinburgh or London or Manchester, has the equal opportunity to get a quality education, to go into a quality job.
You don't think independence will deliver any of these things? Is that your view?
See, I think it's the wrong solution to the wrong problem. The problem is, how do we make sure we have access for all and make sure everyone is able to maximise their full potential and have a country based on not division, but actually on social justice and fairness? And I don't believe that that's only a thing or a priority for people in my own constituency or people that principle ends in a line between Scotland and England. So let's stop obsessing about the individual issues about constitutional politics, and let's instead talk about the real issues about how we get genuine change in our communities so every young person can be an asset to this country, get growth in jobs and get a brighter future for themselves.
You in this
George said that it was his idea to introduce that 16 and 17-year-olds got the right to vote. But a year ago, when I first turned 17, I wouldn't have known what to vote for, so I don't particularly think that giving it to younger people is the right option.
Angus said that, yes. And the person over there in spectacles, on the left, you, sir.
Yes. Angus mentioned this idea of jobs, but how on earth can the SNP justify themselves on social justice when, with creating independence, we're going to lose thousands and thousands of jobs in this country? The thousands of jobs we're going to lose from companies moving down to England, the thousands of jobs we're going to lose in the defence contracts in this country. How on earth can you justify those unemployed people?
OK, I'll come give a chance to this. Lesley.
Well, I've got a very clear idea of the kind of country I want to live in. And it's a country that doesn't use trident or nuclear weapons for its defence. It's a country that puts equality as the most important social goal on all policies, which understands that inequality basically erodes trust between us, between government and citizens. It's a country that puts education top and recognises early years education would transform life. And it's a country that embraces renewables, particularly Scotland, because we are the Saudi Arabia of renewables, and starts our engineering prospects back again by basing it on that. Now, I have to ask myself, how is that going to happen in my lifetime? Mine will be shorter than yours. I'd like to see change in my lifetime, and I've actually voted every party. I have to say, except, sorry, Ruth, the Tories.
There's still time.
No, there's not. And you have to make a judgment. And in next year, as things stand, I will vote yes. Now, the reason I will vote yes is not the great Tara proselytising yes that Angus has to do as a member of the Scottish National Party. And I just want to say this. I'm a journalist. And I want to be able to keep questioning policies that don't sound quite right, all the sorts of aspects of the debate that make it a hard one to be in. And there's an important point in this. I come from Northern Ireland originally, and there are camps there. There is yes and no. There are people who don't talk to each other even now after 50 years of trouble. We don't want to get to a stage where we can't talk easily to one another about our future together. So that's a consideration. But having said all of those qualifications, on balance, I'll vote yes.
OK. The man at the very back there, by the camera. You, sir, with the spectacles on. Yeah.
I'd just like to say that I know that some of you say that if we become independent, we lose our influence in the Bank of England, but despite its name, it's not the Bank of England, it's the Bank of the UK, and Scotland currently has a 10% influence in the Bank of England, which we would maintain after independence if we kept the pound. So there's no guarantee we would lose that influence whatsoever.
OK. George Galloway.
Angus's rather churlish introductory remarks on behalf of the SNP are a pointer, are illuminating as to the kind of Scotland you, as 16 and 17-year-olds, would inherit. His belief that someone like me has no right to be on a BBC Question Time programme because I don't currently have an address in Scotland is rather typical of the narrow-minded and narrow outlook that informs his kind of politics. Similarly, when Nigel Farage was run out of Edinburgh, as David put it, just a few...
well, I'm not sure whether you're applauding because you believe he should have been run out.
I wasn't run out. I wasn't run out. I was locked in a pub, all right? I mean, that's what happened.
Place you like to be. George Galloway.
He wouldn't approve.
Must have been hell, Nigel. Must have been hell. No, this is the point. When he was treated in the way that he was in Edinburgh, Alex Salmond had the opportunity to be statesmanlike, to deplore what had happened, to say that everyone was welcome in Scotland. Everyone with an elected position, everyone with a following in the country had a right to speak and be heard. But he didn't. He backed the people that saw the leader of the UKIP, which I deplore as a party, as it happens, but he is an elected leader of a party with substantial support in these islands.
Not in Scotland,
Alex,
George.
that's not the point.
It is the point.
Is that the point?
Yes, it is.
My God, you're more dangerous than I thought.
George,
there you go, Lesley.
George,
is
do I
lining
have
up
to
with
shout louder to you to ask a question? Do you know what these party, do you know the percentage vote they got at the last election here?
That's not the point. It's not
no,
just
it's
people.
never the point.
It's not just people with a percentage of the vote that have got the right to speak. All of us have got the right to speak. Unless the kind of Scotland you have in mind, unless the kind of Scotland you have in mind is where Angus Robertson will decide who appears on the BBC Question Time rather than David Dimbleby. I don't want to be in that kind of Scotland. I don't want to be in the kind of country where politicians sit with a slide rule and say, you can be on, but you can't because you no longer live here. You can't because you only got X number of votes. What I'm saying to you is, what happened to Farage looked ugly in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And the SNP, I fear, will take you down a road where grudge is everything.
All right.
Where grudge and
would you, Angus, just reply on that, on the narrow point of what George was saying? And the quote from Alex Salmond was, we can frankly do without UKIP, who dislike everybody and know absolutely nothing about Scotland. Do you concur with all that?
I concur with it absolutely. I'm proud that Scotland. I'm proud that Scotland is a country that welcomes people from other countries.
Wasn't when I came the other week, was it?
It is a country. It is a country that is.
Where you come from.
It is a country that is built on. It is a country that is built on immigration.
Hold on.
It is a country that is built on immigration and welcoming people from other places. That's a world of difference to disagreeing with the politics that you represent, Nigel. It's a politics I deplore, and I'm pleased you do not have a single elected MP, a single elected MSP, a single elected councillor in Scotland. You represent next to nobody in Scotland. I will defend your right to speak, Nigel, but I I will also reflect the right of people. I will respect the right of people to protest and say we do not like your kind of politics in this country.
All right. Nigel. I come to you. Nigel Farage.
Well, I came to Edinburgh a few weeks ago to have a debate about what independence really means, because I think you've been sold a false debate. And UKIP does exist in Scotland, and we are growing in the polls in Scotland, but in the past...
Where?
Well, Lesley, you seem to be of the same school of thought. It's quite astonishing that the Scottish media, too, think UKIP shouldn't be allowed to express their opinion in Scotland. And what happened on that day in Edinburgh was there was an attempt to close down my press conference where I was trying to have a debate. Now, any proper democratic party will say, whether we agree or disagree, you have the right to put your arguments. And your leader, Mr Salmond, made it perfectly clear he was quite happy for the nationalist movement to have within it very extreme anti-democratic people that behave like yobs, and that does not represent the vast majority of decent Scottish people. And I thought Salmond showed there is a very ugly side to this whole independence debate. That day I was here.
You were, the young man in the front here, you were saying no, you didn't agree with this. Go on.
Coming back to what the UKIP leader said.
Yeah.
People of us, I don't know, Scottish people received the same treatment heading down south. Not politically, not politically, but within the streets themselves.
I'm sorry.
No, let him make... No, just enlarge on the point. What you're actually saying.
Well, think about it. You were seen out by these yobs. Yet England is seen as a country that defends itself, correct? England, the glorious England. But when we come down south... But when we come down south, we are treated with the same disrespect that you were. Now, I'm not saying...
OK, no, hold on. You two have both had a go. Ruth Davidson.
I mean, I think we've slightly got away from what this question was supposed to be about.
Remind us what it was. What benefits would independence bring to young people?
What can young people look for in this independence debate? And actually, all we've had is 3 alpha males on this panel shouting about petty niggles. And I believe everyone should have a voice. But I also believe that people who ask legitimate questions should have those legitimate questions answered. And they shouldn't be told when they are asking legitimate questions, Angus. This takes us away from Nigel and UKIP, but into all areas of policy, that just because you're asking a question, you're doing Scotland down. Because people deserve answers in the debate on independence. They deserve to make an informed choice. So I believe that young people growing up in Scotland have a great deal of opportunity because we're part of the United Kingdom, because we are part of the biggest trading bloc that we have. We trade more in Scotland with the rest of the UK than we do with the rest of the world combined. 1 in 5 jobs in private sector employment in Scotland is in a company that's headquartered in England, Wales or Northern Ireland. I think that we all benefit from having the sort of research network that the original questioner asked about amongst our universities. I think that we benefit in Scotland from being part of a United Kingdom that sits at the top table, whether that's at the UN, whether that's at the IMF, whether that's in the EU, whether that's in the G8 group of developed nations of this world. You know, I think we gain an awful lot, whether it's even something as small, whether it's something as small to some people as... If you want to throw wars into the mix, Angus, let's talk about Kosovo, where I'm entirely proud that I was over there as a junior reporter. I saw what our forces did over there. Just a few hundred miles from our shores, in Europe, we stopped, or helped stop, ethnic cleansing and genocide. We did that. Scottish soldiers did that. I was there watching the Black Watch do that.
So what's that got to do with the issue of independence?
Tail to tail. Well, Angus was saying that we are not a force for good in this world. I believe that the United Kingdom is a force for good in this world, and that we have demonstrated that with the work that our armed forces do overseas.
All right. Look, I tell you what I'm going to do now, because I said at the beginning of this question that you're divided 50-50. Those who are going to vote yes, those who are inclined to vote no. And I don't want just to pick haphazardly. So I'd like, first of all, just to ask people who are going to vote yes. People who are going to vote no, put your hands down. People who are going to vote yes, and let's just hear your view. The person right up there at the back. Just take 3 or 4 points from here and let the panel respond if they want to, and then we'll do the opposite. Yes?
We're talking about the benefits of independence to young people. I don't feel that young people within the UK are seeing many benefits as being a member of the UK, because currently the child poverty rate is so high. I don't believe that that's helping us at all, being a member
OK,
state.
And you, sir, over there? Yes.
Well, I mean, something came out that this is the first generation of kids in the UK, or young people in the UK, that are going to grow up poorer than their parents since the early 1950s. And also, since the early 1950s, if you take back the result of every single general election in the UK and take the statistics out of it, you will see that the Scottish vote made absolutely no difference. So we're not... Representation doesn't come into it, and values don't come into it either, because it wouldn't have made a difference in the first place.
OK. And you're in the middle there.
I believe if we become independent, then we'll be one step closer to finding aliens.
What? All right, and you're in the front here.
A list of them.
Go on. Did you say what I think you said?
Yes.
Good. OK.
In a list of the most peaceful countries in the world, Ireland scored in the top 10 and UK didn't score anywhere near the top 10. And I think in an independent Scotland, without Trident and everything like that, we'll be able to become one of the more peaceful countries in the world.
Well, that may be true, but remember, this independence debate is being had. The SNP are saying, vote yes for independence, for a legal separation from the United Kingdom, and then let's join the European Union, which of course is developing its own foreign policy, developing its own military, and the most remarkable thing, getting back to the original question, is actually there'll be no benefits for young people, middle-aged people or old people, because what you're being asked to vote on is not independence, you're swapping your masters from Westminster to Brussels, and that's the debate that needs to be had in Scotland. The SNP are not offering independence.
Angus? Angus Robertson.
So I think there's a couple of things that are important to understand in the context of the independence debate, especially for people who are not in Scotland. It's not just the SNP that's in favour of independence. There are people in other parties who are in favour of independence. So there are people who are left of centre, there are people who are right of centre, there are people who are young, there are people who are old. This is not just a proposal from one political party, point one. Point two, this is about changing Scotland and Scottish democracy. At the present time, we are governed by the leading party, the Conservative Party, that has one MP. Can you imagine a normal democracy where you have governments elected with so little representation? That is not democracy. And to go back to Nigel's point, if Scotland is sovereign, our Parliament is able to make all the decisions, it can make decisions to share sovereignty. And I'm in favour of sharing sovereignty. I'm in favour of sharing sovereignty and working with other countries. The reality of the 21st century is we need to work together with other countries. But what is critical is that once Parliament is able to make all the decisions that will make the economy grow, that will make our society more just and will allow us to play a direct role in the world. And that's what I'm sure when everybody's had, and we've got time to discuss this, there's a little bit less than 500 days, I'm confident that people will vote for it. Why? Because 100 years ago, there really weren't that many independent states in the world and members of the United Nations. Now, there's over 200, and there is nobody going back and saying, I want to be run from the masters or the form of governance we had in the past. Independence is the normal state for nations. It gives the best opportunity to everybody, young and old, and that's why I think we'll vote for it.
It's not about being masters. No, David, I have to get in here. Because there's a lot of pejorative words in here.
I'm calling on you, but in answering this, can you pick up the point that Angus made, that there's only one Tory MP in Scotland, and yet they have a Tory government in Westminster deciding this, and that just isn't right or fair?
It's a coalition government. There are double as many MPs in the coalition. There are SNP MPs in Westminster. But that wasn't the point I wanted to pick up on. The point I wanted to pick up on was the pejorative terms that Angus is using there about slaves and masters. I don't feel that the UK is a master and I am a slave. We are part of a shared endeavour that we've built up over 300 years. All of the things that we've built together, all of the things that we've created together, all of the work that we've done together. And when Angus Robertson talks about polls and some people from some parties believe in independence, it's not just the SNP, well, let's look at that. At the last poll that was done of SNP voters, only 61% of them said that they were going to vote yes. That was fewer than the number of SNP voters that wanted an in-out referendum, which was 63%, but they won't offer that. So I think Angus is twisting the facts to suit his own agenda. And what we have to remember is we are a critical and integral part of the UK. And because Scotland is a part of the UK is the better for it.
OK. Lesley Riddoch.
Well,
recent surveys show that the UK is the most regionally imbalanced country in Europe. We have an overheated south that is actually causing problems for every other part of the UK, probably more for northern parts of England, actually, than Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. Is anybody else willing to tackle that? Are we able to have a conversation in the United Kingdom about a system here in which, unbelievably, according to analysts, 1 in 29 Londoners are dollar millionaires? Now, I promise you, I checked that about 3 times. It's almost impossible to believe. We have massive disparities of wealth in this country. They are not just unequal, and we are the 4th most unequal state in the world as things stand, the UK. Now, is that the best we can do? And is that really the future the UK offers? Is the Mother of Parliaments proud of having turnouts of 30%? You know, we're the laughingstock, practically, of Europe with these low turnouts, upon which massive decisions are made by a centralised state in London, which is passing laws and policies that suit that particular corner of the UK at the expense of everyone else. Now, if the rest of the UK was up for it, and in 2004, the northeast of England, the Geordies, had the chance to vote, 77% of them said no. So I started life, good grief, as a Liberal. Now, I believed in a federal Britain. Is it ever going to happen? It evidently isn't. So you have to get to a stage where you think, what's likely to happen in my lifetime? And having a proper, reasoned conversation about changing the whole of Britain is not possible when we are the Scots, we are the tail wagging the dog. The dog is not interested in the vision we have for the future, and I think that's why many people will finally come to a decision that they have to do something a bit more radical to get that.
Lesley Riddoch, thank you. Now, we don't want to stay on this for the rest of the programme, but we'll now switch, please. And I'd just like comments on what Lesley and Angus have said from people who say they will vote no when the time comes next year. You over there with the pink shirt on and the blue jacket.
Yeah, well, I think it'll just be lots of uncertainty, and I don't think that's what Scotland needs at the moment. I think it needs stability, and I think it needs construction. I mean, this is going to lead us down a path where we don't have anything to go. I mean, I think if we have a Labour government in 2015, then a lot could change, and a lot more could happen.
OK, and you in the front here.
I would say I'd vote no at the moment, but I'm actually quite on the fence. And I think at the moment the independence debate has ended up being quite ugly in that we've got people very much for it and spouting all the good things, and then people very much against it. And I don't think we're hearing much balance in terms of this is what would happen to the economy, these are the benefits for young people, and these are the drawbacks. And I think there needs to be a lot more clarity.
And Sarwar?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that last point. What we need is a politics and a debate based on fact and not on myth and assertion. And sadly, that's what we've got from the SNP so far. Is that case of saying, actually, all the things you like will stay the exact same and all the things you don't like just won't happen anymore. It's saying to people that are in big business, actually we'll cut corporation tax, and at the same time saying to trade unions and to the third sector, we'll have record levels of public services. I'm sorry, that's just not being straight with the people of Scotland. You can't have Scandinavian levels of public services and the tax system of Monaco. It's not credible, it's not good arithmetic, and it's certainly not a good illusion. The SNP are being seen right through that. But I want to make a wider point about the politics that you see on the panel today. You've got one political party that wants to divide by people's origin and within communities. You've got another political party that wants to divide our country by those that are in work and those that are out of work, by those that they say are skivers and those that they say are strivers. And you've got one political party that wants to divide based upon where you live in the United Kingdom. Actually, what we need is a politics and a government in this country that doesn't run by the principles of division and grievance, but actually rules by the principle of equality and social justice for everyone, no matter where they live in the United Kingdom.
OK.
Hi, This is actually to the SNP, and it's in terms of education in an independent Scotland. Surely the SNP can be accused of using sort of tactics that now 16 and 17-year-olds are allowed to vote. It's the exact point the SNP have decided to introduce in the new hire. It's compulsory to answer a question on Scottish literature for higher English. Surely this is actually tactical by the SNP, and it's therefore just like providing nationalism to 16 and 17-year-olds to hope to trick us into voting, rather than presenting a case as to why independence is actually good.
Well, it would be tremendously patronising for any politician or any political party to suggest that because you learn the literature or the history of your own country, you're going to vote in any way. You're going to make up your own mind, and that's quite right.
One in 29 members of the Groucho Club in London might be dollar millionaires, but I can assure you that there are millions of people in London that are very far from being millionaires. And this kind of false dichotomy that Lesley drew is the same as the one Angus drew, that there are masters and servants. And I'll tell you where that leads. To the misguided young man in the front row who thinks that English people set about Scottish people in England. If you turn on the television, if you read the major newspapers, if you listen to Parliament, if you look at the captains of business and industry and trade unions in England, it's full of Scottish people. Scottish people are never set upon in England. But the fact that that young man, a fine young man, thought that, thinks that, is a direct result of this kind of talk, that in London they're all dollar millionaires. In England we are master and we are England's servant. There are no English tanks in Scotland. Scottish people could have voted to be a separate country at any time in the last 90 years of universal suffrage. They decided not to on every occasion. I pray that they'll do so again when the referendum comes.
Thank you.
What we end up doing here, and I also didn't say everyone in London is a dollar millionaire. Can we just stop this? Some things are like this in life, some things are others. We can get to a stage where we can surely accept that there is no guarantees for anything in the future. Could you guarantee what, for example, the UK government will give us by way of benefits for Bradford even?
No,
I'm astonished, George, because how can I ask you a question, George? I know you're used to holding fort, but I would like to ask you something.
There's mass unemployment throughout this country. There's mass poverty throughout this country. Stop making false divisions. False dichotomy.
Do the policies. Can I ask
a question? It's not true that 1 in
David,
29 Londoners is a dollar millionaire. It's simply not true.
Could I ask
and it's
you
giving
a
them
question?
the wrong impression.
George,
could I ask you one
yes,
question?
Lesley, ask a question. By all means, keep it brief. George, answer briefly. I want to keep moving because we've only got 10 minutes left in this programme. We're not sticking with independence all the way through. What's your question?
Does the bedroom tax help people in Bradford?
No, it doesn't. And
right, doesn't.
New Labour's
Why is it?
Now, you said one question, you've had it. Right.
New
And the
Labour's
answer was no,
failure
it doesn't. Right.
to commit to scrap the bedroom tax, which could have been turned into David Cameron's poll tax and could have brought him down, is a bigger betrayal of working class people throughout these hours.
Now, all right. Just as a coda, as a tail point to this, Scott Mann has a question. I just want the panel to go round briefly saying what they think of it, having heard what you've all said. Scott Mann.
It's been referred to briefly, but I'd just like to point out that I feel 16, 17-year-olds aren't experienced enough to vote in the referendum. Do the panel agree?
Do you agree? He thinks that 16, 17-year-olds don't have enough experience to vote in the referendum. Do you agree? I'll just go straight round the panel. Yes or no?
No. I think they should vote. They can get married, they can go and join the army, they can smoke. They can vote.
You were against this.
It's not about age, it's about a cut-off. You don't change the voting age for just one poll, which is what is happening at the referendum. We've taken independent advice. The Electoral Commission looked at the majority age of voting quite recently. They said that 18 was about right. It's where a lot of countries have it around the world. We're happy with that. We don't see an overwhelming need for change.
OK. Nigel.
Well, vast numbers of 18-year-olds are not voting in any form of election.
That's not the question.
The big problem
should
is
16 and 17-year-olds
and I think to do this on a one-off basis, for one election without any thought is really rather silly and cheap.
OK, Lesley?
Yes.
Quick answer, Lesley,
yes,
if you would.
16-year-olds can vote because you can be taxed. If you leave school, you can have a job and you could be taxed.
Taxed
now,
at
there's
5.
the old no taxation without representation. You should be able to vote when you're going to be paying tax in a world which expects you to be acting like an adult.
I support 16.
I think behind the question, do you support, would you like a universal franchise for 16 and 17-year-olds?
I support 16 and 17-year-olds having a vote, not just in the referendum, but in every election campaign. I'm delighted that 60% of people in that poll last week said they would vote to stay part of the referendum. But the important point is it's not enough just to give young people the vote. We need to make sure our politics talks about the issues that young people care about, so they actually come out and use their vote when they have that right
Angus,
to do it.
there's no need to ask you you know your answer.
So,
can I get a vote? Why don't you give me a vote? I'm Scottish. Why don't I have a vote on the future of the country?
Well, Angus,
it's a life-changing decision.
Angus.
Well, self-determination is for people who live somewhere to make a decision, and that's why people who are registered to vote in Scotland will be making that decision. Should 16 and 17-year-olds be able to vote in the referendum? Yes, we proposed it. I think it should not just for the referendum. I think it should be for all elections. We need to connect and reconnect the young, especially with the democratic process. This is a good way of doing it.
OK. We're going to move on to a last question, and it's not about independence. Well, it's not about independence for Scotland. It's from Cameron Gilchrist.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, should the UK intervene in Syria?
Should the UK intervene in Syria? Do you have a view on this? Yes, fire away. We'll come to the panel next. Go on.
Right, I think, yes, obviously, definitely, it should be allowed, UK should be allowed to intervene in Syria. All the ridiculous things that are happening there. But, you know, the current issue is actually the UN. The UN has this thing called the UN Security Council, where there are 5 permanent seats and they're allowed to veto, which means that you can stop, it's China, Russia, France, USA and Britain. And then you have like other countries. So that's like say, and if you can veto, that means no matter what, if 9 out of 10 voted yes, then it just doesn't happen.
But to go to the point, you'd like to see this United Kingdom intervening now in Syria. Anna Sarwar.
What we have is, let's be clear about who the blame lies with. It lies with President Assad. You have almost 100,000 people killed since the uprising began. You've got 1.6 million refugees, half of whom are children, and you've got 4.6 million people in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. This is a time for an urgent international response, not to get weapons to people so they can kill each other more, but actually to get a peaceful resolution that gets people round the table and has a political and diplomatic solution. On the point about arming the rebels, let's be clear, let's learn the lessons from history. Arming the rebels might have the negative effect of actually escalating the violence, prolonging a civil war, and actually having a Cold War by proxy between the UK and others and with Russia. I don't think that's positive. I don't think that's a good thing. Let's learn the lessons from Iraq. Let's learn the lessons from Afghanistan, and actually let's have a solution that brings about meaningful dialogue and actually, crucially, supports peace and not violence, because violence solves nothing.
Nigel Farage.
Well, going to war and intervening in war is the biggest decision a government can make. And yet, from the time of Blair onwards, we seem to, with glee, go to war or intervene in wars without ever thinking through who is it we're actually supporting? What is the long-term consequence of our action going to be? It is perfectly clear that within the rebel groups in Syria, there is some very strong linkage with Al-Qaeda. Do you know, we could load these guys up with guns and rockets that one day might actually be used against British soldiers. We don't know what we're doing. Our history of intervening in wars in the Middle East over the course of the last decade shows we have not made anything better. Without a clear objective, without understanding who the rebels are, we shouldn't even consider getting involved, in my opinion.
Okay. Ruth Davidson.
There are 2 immediate priorities. The first is to deal with the people who are being affected by this. That's the families of the 93,000 dead. That's the 1.5 million the UN say are already refugees, which will rise to 3.5 million by the end of the year. That's more than the entire population of Wales will be displaced. And the UK government's put over £170 million worth of aid to help these people who are being directly affected. And the second priority is to find some way of a negotiated settlement, a peace and a transition government.
And the verb intervene, what does that mean to you?
Well, we have to make sure that we can get Assad around the table at this Geneva conference that is being planned over the next few weeks. And
he's
we need to
waiting for the opposition to arrive.
Well, no,
he's already at the table.
George, you know, far be it from me to see you stand up and defend another dictator in that part of the world. But the idea that Assad is coming to that table willing to have a negotiated peace with people and to form a transition government and take himself out of the post of president is an absolute nonsense.
This kind of speak your weight machine brief that you've been given from William Hague's Foreign Office just won't do. The Syrian regime has been at the negotiating table from the beginning, following the Kofi Annan plan, the UN special envoy, to have exactly the democratic transition that you're talking about. It's the fact that you're already intervening, giving guns and money to Al-Qaeda, who cut people's chests open and eat their hearts on video and post it on YouTube. If that murderer in Woolwich had gone to Damascus instead, William Hague would have given him money, because we are backing these kind of extremist Al-Qaeda maniacs in Syria. You're already intervening. The intervention we need is to force our clients in the Syrian opposition to go under US and Russian chairmanship to Geneva and make them sit around the table until they've got an agreement that will be a political transition to democracy in Syria.
Angus Robertson. Angus Robertson.
So, we're being exhorted quite rightly to learn the lessons from history, and it's not that long ago that we armed the Taliban because we thought it was a tremendously good thing that they should fight the Soviet Union. And then a number of decades later, those very same people are killing service people from the UK and elsewhere. And we haven't learned the lesson of history in Afghanistan, and I fear we are not going to learn the lesson of history in relation to Syria. Should we intervene, we certainly should not do that by arming one side. Do we actually understand that Russia is arming the Assad regime to the teeth? Do we think that selling arms to one side of the conflict, which will then be answered by the Russians providing more weapons on the other side, will bring peace? That is the road to disaster. And the young man quite rightly brought up the United Nations, but it's hardly even been reported so far. The United Nations is now finding it unable to provide peacekeepers for the border between Israel and Syria. So the danger is not just the nearly 100,000 people who've died in Syria, it's the potential for a conflict right across that region. And we should not be helping a disaster like that.
Lesley Riddoch, and briefly, if you would,
Yes, well, because I think in a sense there's a lot of agreement here. I mean, if you remember those pictures that came in, that have been coming in for years now, and the sense of impotence you have when you watch children, and children have been the biggest casualties. The report that came out today that said 93,000 people have been killed, disproportionately children have died in Syria. Now, watching that, as we have done, without feeling any way that we can manage to effect some fairness and some relief for those people, or encourage any kind of hope that there would be a resolution there, has been a horrible thing to sit through, to not be able to effect this. But now we're at a stage where some of the rebel groups are a dangerous set of groups to arm. So I think we have to get to a stage, and I see there's been a bit of backtracking now from the Conservatives. We have to get to a stage where we get some peace talks on the go. And that may sound like kind of pious hopes, but despite what we've seen, it's the best hope, and we have to go for it.
We've got 25 people with their hands up, and I'm not going to be able to call on any of you. I'm very sorry. Thank you all very much for the part you've played so far, but our time's up. I can't do anything about that. I'd like to go on much longer, but I can't. So I have to announce next week, when Question Time is going to be in London, and we have the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, on the panel, the comedian Russell Brand. You're welcome to come. The Daily Mail columnist Melanie Phillips. Tessa Jarl for Labour and Ed Davey for the Liberal Democrats. The week after that, we're going to be in Newcastle. And if you want to come either to London or Newcastle, the usual rules apply to our website. The address is on the screen there. Call 0330 123 99 88. If you're listening on 5 Live, you can call in and continue the debate now on Question Time Extra Time. So I hope you can do that. Meantime, from here, just to thank our panel and all of you who came to take part in this special edition, very special edition of Question Time. From Edinburgh until next Thursday. Good night.
Discussing protests and exam reform. This week is next on BBC One.